Welcome back to Gravepath Stories. Tonight, I have 6 most disturbing TRUE Montana wilderness horror stories for you. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed. Because once you step onto the grave path, you don't walk alone. I was tightening the last bolt on the relay cabinet when the radio on my chest crackled and spoke my call sign back to me, clear as day, like someone standing right behind my shoulder. And I actually laughed at first because I assumed I had bumped the transmit button with my elbow and caused a feedback loop. I said my call sign out loud again, just to check, and waited. The forest stayed quiet. The radio stayed quiet. I shook my head, leaned back into the cabinet, and focused on the wiring, because the station had been dead for years, and my whole reason for hiking out there was to confirm it could never be brought online again. I had volunteered for the job because no one else wanted to walk that stretch of Star Meadow Road, and because I knew the equipment better than most. I had worked emergency communications since I was young, and I knew every frequency in the county by heart. This one had been decommissioned after a storm took down the main tower sometime in the 70s, and the paperwork said it was officially silent. That was why the sound of my own call sign, coming from a dead channel, made my stomach tighten in a way I did not like. I clipped the radio closer to my mouth and said, "Control, this is me at the Star Meadow Relay, radio check," expecting nothing. Instead, the reply came immediately, slightly distorted, but unmistakably my voice, repeating the exact same sentence, even down to the pause before the word relay. My hands went cold. I stood there staring at the cabinet like it had betrayed me, like it was some kind of animal that had learned a trick it should not know. I told myself it had to be interference. Old equipment could do strange things. I switched frequencies, then switched back. Silence. I exhaled, feeling stupid, and knelt to gather my tools. That was when the radio spoke again without prompting, my call sign first, then, "Help me. I can't get out." I remember saying my own name out loud, just to hear a human voice that wasn't coming from the radio. My heart was pounding so hard, it made my vision feel tight. I pressed the transmit button and said, "Who is this?" But what came back was my own voice saying, "Who is this?" only slower, stretched. Like someone learning how to talk by listening to a recording. I yanked the battery from the radio. The sound stopped. I stood there for a long moment, breathing, telling myself it was over, that radios without power could not speak. Then the relay cabinet behind me hummed to life. I spun around and stared at the meters climbing on equipment that should not have been capable of holding a charge. The indicator light flickered red, then steady. I backed away, my heel catching on a rock, and nearly fell. The cabinet door rattled as if something inside was moving, though I knew there was nothing in there but wires and boards. I forced myself closer, because that is what my training had taught me to do. I opened the cabinet fully and checked the lines. Everything was connected exactly as I had left it. Nothing was generating power. The radio on my chest was dead weight, but the relay began transmitting anyway, broadcasting on the old emergency frequency that no one was supposed to monitor anymore. My voice came out of the cabinet speakers, calm, tired, saying, "I've been here too long." I wanted to run, but the words pinned me in place. They were not random. They were things I had said before, Things I remembered thinking during long shifts alone. I slammed the cabinet shut and stepped back, shouting that this was not real, that equipment could not remember me. The reply came softer, almost apologetic. You left me. I understood then, in a way that made my knees weak, that whatever this was had been listening for a long time. The relay had been dead, but the frequency had not been empty. It had been collecting, storing, waiting. I grabbed my pack and started down the road, moving fast, not caring about noise or footing. The radio clipped to my vest, still without its battery, vibrated faintly against my chest like a trapped insect. I did not touch it. I did not look back. Halfway down the trail, the sound of my own footsteps came from behind me, perfectly matched, even when I stopped. I turned slowly and saw nothing, but the radio vibrated harder, and the voice came through again, no longer distorted. Don't leave me again. I broke into a run. My lungs burned, my legs shook, and every logical part of my brain screamed that this could not be happening. I reached the point where the trees opened, and my truck should have been visible. But the road stretched empty, longer than it had been on the way in. The radio spoke one last time, quieter now, like it was very close to my ear. If you go, I stay. I stopped. I knew then what it wanted. The relay did not want power. It wanted presence. It wanted someone listening the way it had listened. I walked back up the road with my hands shaking and my mouth dry. When I reached the cabinet, the humming had stopped. The meters were dark. Everything was dead again. I set the radio on the ground beside the cabinet, reinserted the battery, and keyed the mic. "This is me," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm here." The reply came instantly, but it was not my voice anymore. It was quieter, steadier, like a satisfied breath. "Thank you." I left the radio there. I hiked out without it, without looking back. I filed a report saying the relay was permanently inactive and could not be repaired. No one questioned me. Years later, I still hear static sometimes when I am alone, and I never answer unknown calls. I know the frequency is occupied. I know something is listening. And I know with a certainty that has never faded, that as long as I stay away, it stays quiet, holding the last signal I gave it, waiting, just in case I ever change my mind. I was halfway up the tower ladder when the radio on my chest crackled, sharp enough to make me miss a rung and bang my knee. I swore out loud, steadying myself with one hand on the cold metal rail, my pack shifting on my shoulders. "Huckleberry Ridge lookout. Arriving for relief," I said into the mic, breath already short. "This is Lena. I'm on site." The radio answered with a long stretch of static. Then nothing. I waited, thumb pressed against the transmit button, listening for any sign that someone had heard me. Nothing came back. I told myself it was a dead zone, the kind you expect up here, and climbed the rest of the way, telling myself not to be jumpy on my first solo rotation. The trapdoor opened with a stiff groan, like it hadn't been lifted in a while. Inside, the tower smelled wrong, not rotten, not moldy, just stale in a way that suggested no one had breathed this air recently. I dropped my pack and looked around, calling out, "Hello." The way you do even when you know no one should be there. No answer. The chair by the window was pushed in neatly. The bed was made tight enough to bounce a coin. The propane stove was cold. It felt less like someone had just stepped out and more like a place staged to look occupied. I set my pack down and went straight for the logbook. Because that's what you do. You sign in, you note the time you arrived, you scan the last few entries to get a feel for the rhythm of the place. The book lay open on the desk, pen resting across the page. I expected to see the previous lookout's handwriting, maybe a note about weather patterns or bear sightings. Instead, the last entry was dated 6 weeks back. Same neat hand, same ink, same routine notes, and then nothing. Page after page after that were blank. I flipped through them, feeling my chest tighten. No relief logged. No absence explained. Just a sudden stop. I told myself maybe the previous lookout had been pulled early, or there'd been a mix-up, or the book had been replaced and this was the wrong one. I checked the drawer. There was only the one. My name wasn't anywhere in it, obviously. But neither was anyone else's for a long stretch of days that felt too long to be a simple mistake. I wrote my name anyway, the date, the fact that I'd arrived as scheduled. As I capped the pen, a weird thought crossed my mind, sharp and unwelcome. That I was writing into something that didn't expect to be written in. I tried the radio again, calling base, calling any nearby lookout, repeating myself slowly, clearly, static. I adjusted the antenna, changed channels, checked the battery. Everything looked fine. The silence pressed in, not loud, just heavy, like being underwater. I reminded myself that radios fail all the time, that schedules get crossed. That 6 weeks of blank pages didn't mean the tower had been abandoned. Still, I found myself moving more quietly, as if someone might be listening. I unpacked, set my things in the small spaces that were supposed to become mine for the season. Every so often I caught myself glancing at the door, half expecting it to open. When it didn't, I felt both relieved and uneasy. By the time evening settled in, I was exhausted enough to think I might sleep, despite the strange start. I lay on the bed, boots off, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the soft tick of cooling metal. Just as I was drifting off, I heard footsteps on the stairs below. I sat up so fast my head spun. The steps were slow, deliberate, the sound of someone who knew exactly where they were going. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, heart hammering, and called out, "Hello." My voice sounded thin. The footsteps stopped. For a long moment there was nothing, and then I heard the ladder creak again, this time as if someone were going down. I rushed to the trapdoor and looked, but the stairs were empty. No movement, no sound. I told myself it was the tower settling, that I was tired, that I'd imagined it. Still, I locked the door before lying back down, every sense stretched tight. The next morning I woke to the sound of the radio crackling. For a split second, relief washed over me. I lunged for it, answering before the voice on the other end finished speaking. "Huckleberry Ridge, this is Lena," I said. "I've been trying to reach you." The voice paused. Then it said, calm and distant, "Can you confirm who is staffing the tower right now?" I frowned. "I am," I said. "I arrived yesterday to relieve the previous lookout." There was a longer pause this time. "According to our records," the voice said carefully, "no one has been assigned to Huckleberry Ridge since early summer." I felt a coldness spread through my chest. I asked what that meant. Asked where the previous lookout was. Asked why no one had responded to my calls. The voice on the radio told me to stand by. that they needed to check something. When they came back, they sounded different, tighter. They told me there had been an error in the schedule, that the tower was supposed to be decommissioned for the season, that no one should have been there at all. Then who's been logging entries? I asked, thinking of the neat handwriting stopping 6 weeks back. The voice didn't answer that. Instead, they asked me to read the last entry out loud. As I did, I realized something I hadn't noticed before. The last note wasn't routine at all. It mentioned a presence, a sense of being watched, the feeling that the tower remembered people even after they left. I don't know how I missed it the first time, maybe because it was written in the same calm tone as everything else. When I finished reading, the radio was silent again. No acknowledgement, no instructions, just static. I spent the rest of the day on edge, jumping at every sound, checking the stairs whenever I heard a creak. Twice, I thought I heard someone moving around outside, but when I looked, there was nothing. The forest below was empty still. By late afternoon, I decided I was leaving. Official assignment or not, something was wrong, and I didn't want to be alone up there another night. I packed quickly, hands shaking, and slung my pack over my shoulders. As I opened the trapdoor, I saw the logbook on the desk, open to a fresh page. My heart sank. I was sure I'd closed it. I stepped closer and froze. There, in the same neat handwriting as the previous entries, was a new line. It was dated today. It said simply, "She arrived and doesn't know yet." My name was written beneath it, careful and precise, in handwriting that was not mine. I didn't think. I bolted. I climbed down the ladder too fast, scraping my hands, not carrying. I hit the ground and ran, not looking back, not stopping until my lungs burned and the tower was out of sight. I didn't slow until I reached the trailhead, where a truck was parked that I didn't recognize. A man stood by it, looking up the trail as if he'd been waiting. He asked if I was the lookout. I shook my head, words failing me. He frowned and said, "That's strange. They told me someone was up there." I drove straight to the ranger station and told them everything, all of it spilling out in a rush. They listened, exchanged looks, and then told me there had been another lookout, a woman who'd vanished mid-season years earlier. Her logbook had ended the same way. They'd sealed the tower for a while after that, but eventually, somehow, it had been put back into rotation, its history smoothed over by paperwork. No one could explain the handwriting. No one could explain the footsteps. They told me I was lucky I left when I did. They sent a team up the next day. The tower was empty. The logbook was gone. There were no signs anyone had been there recently. Officially, it was chalked up to stress, miscommunication, a mistake. Unofficially, one of the older rangers took me aside and said some places hold on tighter than they should, that some jobs don't like being left unfinished. I never went back. I transferred out that season, took a desk job, tried to forget. But sometimes, when I'm alone and it's quiet, I swear I hear a radio crackle and a calm voice asking me to confirm who is staffing the tower right now. I woke up because something exhaled against the side of my tent, slow and deliberate, close enough that the nylon pressed inward with each breath. I lay there frozen, eyes open in the dark, listening to that sound repeat again and again and again, right where my head rested. My first thought was animal, but it was wrong immediately. Too steady. Too patient. I didn't move. I didn't even swallow. I just listened. Counting the breaths until I lost count, and my chest started to hurt from holding my own. I whispered hello without meaning to. The word barely left my mouth, more breath than sound. The breathing outside paused. Every hair on my arms lifted. I waited for it to resume. But instead the tent wall shifted slightly. Not pushed, just settled. As if someone had adjusted their stance inches from my face. I pulled my sleeping bag tighter around my shoulders and stared at the faint outline of the mesh pocket inside the tent, trying to anchor myself to something solid. I told myself it was a deer. Or a curious moose. I had camped alone before, plenty of times, and animals came close. But animals didn't breathe like that, slow and careful, right at head height. Animals didn't stop when spoken to. My phone was somewhere near my feet, but the thought of reaching for it felt impossible. Any movement felt like an invitation. Minutes passed, or hours. Time didn't work right anymore. The breathing came back, softer now, like whoever or whatever it was had leaned closer. The tent wall brushed my cheek through the fabric, cold and damp, carrying a faint smell I couldn't place. Not rot, not sweat. Something dry and old. I pressed my lips together and focused on keeping my breath shallow so it wouldn't match me. I considered screaming. The sound formed in my throat, but the idea of what might happen after stopped me. There was no one else around. No neighboring tents. I had chosen this spot because it was quiet, because I wanted to be alone. That thought felt like a punishment now. I listened harder, trying to pick up any other sound. Footsteps. Clothing. Anything. There was nothing. Just breathing and the soft creak of nylon stretching and relaxing. At some point, my neck started to ache from holding my head at an angle away from the wall. I shifted a fraction of an inch, barely enough to ease the pressure. Immediately, the breathing stopped again. I felt watched in a way that went beyond being seen. It felt measured, evaluated, like the thing outside was noting every change I made. I whispered again, louder this time, asking who was there. My voice shook, despite my effort to steady it. The response wasn't a voice. It was a sound that came from lower than where a person's mouth should be, a slow inhale that dragged along the tent seam. The zipper quivered slightly. I stared at it, waiting for it to move. It didn't. That somehow felt worse. I tried to reason through my fear. If it was a person, they would speak, or move, or do something recognizable. If it was an animal, it would sniff, or paw, or lose interest. This did neither. It just stayed. Breathing. Waiting. I thought about the knife I kept in my pack. I thought about the spray clipped to the side pocket. Both felt impossibly far away. I don't know when I started crying. My face was wet, but I didn't remember the tears coming. I kept them silent, letting them soak into the sleeping bag. The breathing outside didn't change. It didn't react. That made it clear that whatever was out there didn't care about my fear, or maybe it did, but not in a way I understood. At some point, exhaustion crept in. My body betrayed me, slipping into half sleep. Each time my eyes closed, the breathing felt closer, louder. I snapped awake repeatedly, heart racing, convinced the tent wall had pressed further in. But it never crossed that line. It never touched me directly. It stayed right there, just enough. I whispered prayers I hadn't used in years. I promised things I didn't believe in. I told myself that when the light came, it would be over. Morning always made things rational. Morning explained noises. Morning brought tracks and answers. I clung to that idea like a rope. When the light finally began to seep through the fabric, dull and gray, the breathing was still there. That terrified me more than the dark had. I had expected it to leave before being seen. The fact that it stayed made my stomach twist. I lay perfectly still, watching the tent walls brighten, listening to that steady rhythm inches from my face. Then, without warning, the breathing stopped for good. No fading, no movement away, just absence. I waited, counting silently, forcing myself not to move too soon. When I finally worked up the nerve to sit up, the space outside my head felt empty. Too empty. The tent wall no longer pressed inward. It hung loose. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. The screen light made me flinch. I checked the time, though it barely registered. Morning. Real morning. I unzipped the tent slowly, every sound painfully loud in my ears. I half expected a face to be right there when the opening widened. There was nothing. I stepped out, my legs weak, scanning the ground around the tent. The soil was undisturbed, no footprints, no marks, no signs of anything circling or approaching, except right where my head had been. Two deep impressions pressed into the earth, symmetrical, close together, like knees or elbows. Sunk in as if something heavy had leaned there for a long time. I stared at them until my vision blurred. They were too defined to be accidental, too deliberate. I crouched down and touched the ground. It was firm. Whatever made those impressions hadn't been light. I backed away, my heart pounding, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. I didn't pack carefully. I didn't eat. I stuffed everything into my bag and left, my eyes constantly flicking to the trees, to the empty spaces between them. Nothing followed me. Nothing called out. The silence felt staged, like an audience holding its breath. When I reached my car, I locked the doors and sat there shaking. I told myself stories all the way home. Animals, soil shift, my imagination. But none of them explained the breathing. None of them explained how it knew exactly where my head was. I haven't camped alone since. I still wake sometimes with the memory of that sound, steady and patient, waiting just on the other side of something thin. I was standing at the counter with the logbook open in front of me, pen hovering, when I realized every page for the past 3 weeks was blank. And my first thought wasn't fear, it was that someone hadn't done their job and now I was going to get blamed for it. I flipped back again, slower this time, pressing my thumb against the paper, feeling that dry resistance that only unused pages have. No impressions, no indentations, nothing written and erased. Just clean sheets dated day after day, all initialed in the margin by a name that wasn't mine. I said out loud, to no one, "That's not funny." Because sometimes talking keeps your brain from running off on its own. The radio on my shoulder cracked softly. A routine weather relay, and I answered it automatically, voice steady, like this was just another paperwork issue. I signed the log for the current date, wrote my name clearly, and added a note about missing entries. Procedure. That's what I clung to. I had only been covering this district for 8 days. The regular ranger, Tom, was on medical leave. I didn't know him well, just a few training overlaps years earlier. The cabin was remote but not abandoned. Everything else worked. Power radio, vehicle, filing cabinets. Only the logbook was wrong. That night, after dinner, I pulled the radio records. They were stored digitally and backed up to hard copies in the office. Daily check-ins, patrol confirmations, trail status updates. All logged, all time-stamped, all signed off by the duty ranger. The name on the records was mine, not typed. Written. Scanned handwriting from faxed field reports. Slanted letters, tight spacing. The way I looped my lowercase g without thinking. I stared at one page until my eyes hurt, tracing the curve of an A I'd written 1,000 times before. I hadn't been here. I told myself it was a clerical error, a template issue. Someone reused an old signature, but the dates were recent. The content was specific. Fallen tree near mile marker 14. Loose gate by the southern boundary. Notes about a hiker with a limp I remembered encountering 2 days earlier. That part made my stomach tighten. The next morning, I checked the logbook again. My entry from the night before was gone. Not torn out. Not smudged. Gone cleanly, as if the page had never been written on at all. I pressed my fingers into the paper, searching for an impression. Nothing. I radioed headquarters. Asked if they'd received my reports the night before. The dispatcher confirmed, read back my notes word for word, including a sentence I distinctly remembered thinking about but not writing. I laughed, sharp and nervous, and said something about déjà-vu. She didn't laugh back. By the third day, I started keeping my own notes on loose paper, stuffing them into my pocket, locking the logbook drawer. When I opened it again after patrol, the drawer was unlocked and the loose notes were gone. That night, the radio crackled while I was brushing my teeth. West Fork, daily log received. The dispatcher said. I froze, foam dripping down my chin. I didn't send anything, I said. There was a pause, just long enough to stretch thin. Well, someone did, she replied. Signed by you. I slept with the radio on after that, volume low, listening to the static breathe. On the 5th night, I woke to the sound of pages turning. Slurful. From the office. I didn't move at first. My heart was pounding too loud. I told myself it was the building settling, wind, anything. Then I heard a pen scratch. Not fast. Deliberate. I reached for the radio and whispered my call sign. No response. I tried again louder. Still nothing. The pen kept moving. I stood, every joint stiff, and walked toward the office, each step measured. The door was open. The desk lamp was on. The logbook lay open. And I was sitting there, not facing me, facing the book. Same uniform. Same braid tucked under the collar. Same scar on the back of my left hand from when I slipped during academy training. She didn't look up. I couldn't breathe. My vision tunneled. I remember thinking, absurdly, that she was holding the pen wrong. She spoke without turning. You're late. My voice came out broken. Who are you? She finally looked at me, and her eyes were exhausted in a way mine had never been, like someone who hadn't slept properly in years. I'm the one who stays, she said. You're the one who leaves. I shook my head hard. That's not possible. She smiled, small and sad. That's what I said. She stood, and as she did, I felt a pressure in my chest, like something shifting. She handed me the pen. Write it down, she said. I took it without meaning to. The moment the pen touched paper, memories flooded in that weren't mine. Nights alone, endless patrols, calling in reports no one questioned. Watching replacements come and go, I dropped the pen and screamed. When I woke, it was morning. I was on the floor. The office was empty. The logbook was closed. Every page was filled, all in my handwriting. I packed my things that day and left without radioing out. Headquarters never questioned it. The records showed I'd completed my assignment weeks earlier. I never went back to field duty. Years later, I requested my personnel file. It showed a continuous posting at West Fork Ranger District, lasting 9 years. Under reason for reassignment, it read, "Voluntary transfer. Signed by me." I still don't know which one of us walked away, but I know this. Someone is still there, writing. I woke up choking on cold air and the sound of metal clinking, like someone gently testing a chain. For a few seconds I stayed still, heart thudding, listening hard. The sound came again, closer this time, right outside the cabin door. I slid my hand under the blanket, found the handle of the flashlight, and held my breath. Whoever it was didn't speak. The metal scraped once more, then stopped. Silence settled so thick it rang in my ears. I waited longer than made sense, counting my breaths before swinging my legs off the cot. The floorboards were ice cold. I padded toward the door, flashlight off, and leaned close enough to smell the old pine resin baked into the wood. I whispered hello, my voice thin and useless. No answer. I reached for the handle and turned it. It didn't move. I tried again, harder. Still nothing. That was when I noticed the deadbolt slid fully into place, the heavy steel bar seated clean and firm. From the outside, I stepped back so fast I banged my shin on the table. The pain grounded me for a second. I stared at the bolt like it might move on its own. Like maybe I was still half dreaming. I knew how that lock worked. It could not be thrown from inside. The keyhole faced outward. My first thought was that someone had locked me in as a joke. The second thought was that there was no one within miles who could have done that. I grabbed the radio from the shelf and twisted the knob. Static hissed back. I tapped it, changed channels, tried again. Nothing but noise. The generator outside was still running, which meant the power line was fine. This wasn't some full system failure. I went to the window by the door and wiped a circle clear with my sleeve. The ground outside was bare and hard, exactly the way it had been when I went to bed. No snow, no mud, no footprints. Just undisturbed earth leading right up to the porch. I backed away from the window and laughed, a sharp little sound that surprised me. I told myself I had forgotten something obvious. Maybe I'd locked it myself somehow. Maybe the bolt had slipped. I tested the door again, rattling it hard enough to make the hinges groan. Solid. The bolt didn't budge. I spent the next hour checking every inch of the cabin. The back door was bolted too, same situation. Windows were shut and latched from the inside. No cracks big enough for a hand. No missing boards. No sign anyone had been inside with me. My keys were on the hook where I always left them. I tried the deadbolt key in the inside handle just in case. Even though it wasn't designed that way. It didn't fit. When the initial panic wore off, a colder fear settled in. Whoever did this knew exactly how the locks worked. They hadn't left a single mark in the dirt. They hadn't taken anything. They had just made sure I couldn't leave. I radioed again at first light, switching to the emergency channel and repeating my call sign until my throat hurt. Still nothing. The nearest ranger station was hours away by truck, longer on foot. I did the math in my head without meaning to. Fuel, food, time. I could last, but only if nothing else went wrong. I decided to break a window. It felt extreme, but so did being locked inside. I picked the smallest pane and wrapped my jacket around my fist. The glass shattered loud as a gunshot. I froze, listening for a response. Nothing. I cleared the rest carefully and climbed halfway out, then stopped. The porch was empty. The ground below it was perfect. No scuffs, no prints, no drag marks. The deadbolt was still thrown, thick steel gleaming in the daylight. I reached out and touched it. It was cold, but not the way metal should be after a freezing night. It felt like it had been handled recently. I didn't climb out. I don't know why. Something about stepping through that window felt wrong, like crossing a line I didn't understand yet. I climbed back in and taped cardboard over the broken pane. My hands were shaking hard enough that it took 3 tries. Around midday, I heard footsteps. They weren't heavy, just slow, deliberate steps on the porch boards. I moved to the door and pressed my ear to it. The steps stopped right on the other side. I said hello again, louder this time, trying to sound calm. My voice echoed oddly, like the cabin was too empty. There was a pause, then the deadbolt slid back with a clean, practiced motion. I yanked the door open. No one was there. The bolt hung loose in the open position. The porch was empty. The ground was still untouched. I stood there for a long time, staring out at nothing, waiting for my fear to catch up with me. When it did, it came hard. I slammed the door shut and threw the inside latch, even though it wouldn't stop someone with the key. I packed in a hurry after that. I didn't bother cleaning or shutting down properly. I just wanted to leave. When I stepped off the porch, my boots scuffed the dirt and left a clear print. It felt obscene, like I was breaking a rule. I walked fast, then faster, until the cabin was out of sight. The truck was exactly where I left it. It started on the first try. As I drove away, I kept expecting to see someone in the rearview mirror, standing in the road, but there was nothing. Just empty land and my own tracks leading away. I reported the incident as soon as I reached the station. They listened politely, wrote it down, nodded. One of them asked if I might have sleepwalked. Another suggested pranksters. No one explained the lack of tracks. No one explained the bolt. A week later, they told me the locks had been replaced years earlier. The old deadbolts had been welded shut after a malfunction. There was no key anymore. The bolt on that cabin door was not supposed to move at all. They showed me the maintenance log. The handwriting on the last entry was mine. It said everything was secure. I quit that job the same day. I've never been back. Sometimes when I wake up in the night, I still hear metal sliding into place, smooth and careful, right outside the door. I was already in the water when the kayak lurched sideways, just enough to make my stomach drop and my hands clamp too hard around the paddle. I corrected late, scraped the hull against the shoreline rocks, and felt that sharp spike of anger at myself that always comes when a small mistake reminds you how alone you really are. I steadied the boat, breathing through my nose, telling myself to slow down. I remember thinking I still had plenty of daylight, plenty of energy, plenty of margin for error. That thought didn't last long. I reached back, checked the dry bag, then tapped the emergency beacon clipped to my vest, more out of habit than concern. It was there, sealed, silent, exactly where it should be. I had no intention of using it. I wasn't injured. The kayak was intact. Still, I took a moment to float there, letting the water rock me, listening to the faint lap against the hull while my heart settled. That quiet felt heavy, like the pause before someone speaks. I pushed off again and paddled toward the narrow inlet I'd marked on my map. The inlet narrowed faster than I expected, reeds closing in, paddle strokes shorter now. The water grew sluggish, pulling at the kayak like it didn't want to let go. When the hull bumped something solid beneath the surface, I froze. I leaned forward, peered down, and saw nothing but dark water and my own distorted reflection. I backed out carefully, every movement deliberate, aware of how quickly a bad decision out here could turn serious. That was when the radio clipped near my shoulder crackled to life. At first I thought it was interference. A hiss, then a burst of static, then a voice cutting through, calm and professional. They said my name. Not shouted, not panicked, just stated like they were confirming a detail on a form. I nearly dropped the paddle. I hadn't checked in with anyone since launching. I hadn't called for help. I answered automatically, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be, telling them I was fine, that I hadn't activated anything. There was a pause on the line, long enough for me to hear my own breathing. Then the voice came back, slower now, asking me to confirm my location. I told them exactly where I was, reading from the map, adding landmarks I could see. Another pause. When they spoke again, the tone had changed. They said they had already responded to an emergency beacon from those coordinates earlier that day. They said teams had searched the shoreline, the water, the surrounding area. They said no one was found. I remember laughing, a short, sharp sound that surprised me. I told them that wasn't possible. I was right there. I was talking to them. The beacon was still clipped to my vest, untouched. I held it up as if they could see it. The voice on the radio asked me to check the serial number anyway. My hands shook as I read it aloud. Another pause. Then they said it matched. They asked me to describe what I was wearing. I did. They asked me to describe my kayak. I did. Each answer seemed to tighten something unseen around my chest. Finally, they told me to stay where I was. Help was already en route. I asked them who they thought they had been looking for earlier. They didn't answer that question. They just told me again to stay put. The water felt different then, heavier. I noticed small ripples moving against the current, converging toward the kayak. I turned slowly, scanning the shoreline, expecting to see another boat, a ranger, anyone. There was nothing. The radio crackled again, and the voice said something that made my blood go cold. They said the earlier signal had stopped abruptly, as if the beacon had been submerged, then remerged briefly before going silent forever. I looked down at the water beside me, imagining the beacon sinking, bobbing, disappearing. I pulled the kayak closer to shore and scrambled out, boots slipping on wet stones. I dragged the kayak up until it was secure and sat there, hugging my knees, forcing myself to think logically. Equipment malfunction, data error, anything but what my mind kept circling. I checked the beacon again. No damage. No signs of use. Still sealed. When the rescue team finally arrived, they looked as confused as I felt. They walked me through everything they had done earlier that day. Same coordinates. Same shoreline. Same stretch of water. I showed them where I had been floating. One of them went quiet, staring at the water longer than necessary. Later, in the truck, away from the radio chatter, he told me they had found a kayak that morning, wedged under the bank, empty. Same model as mine. Same color. No sign of the paddler. I asked him what happened to it. He said it had been taken for evidence, then hesitated, then added that it had vanished from the secured area before anyone could catalogue it. We sat in silence after that. I was driven back to town, wrapped in a blanket I didn't need, answering questions I couldn't fully process. Eventually, they let me go. I never went back on the water after that. The beacon still sits in a drawer untouched. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear a faint radio hiss, like a signal trying to break through. I tell myself it's memory, stress, imagination. But I know what they told me. I know someone had already been lost at my coordinates. And I know somehow the beacon had been waiting for me to arrive so it could finally stop calling for help.